to you, you. Good morning, good morning to you, you. Good morning, good morning. Won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning to you. You, good morning to you. You, good morning to you, and many more. Good morning, and welcome to Daring Dialogues. I'm your host today, Shantae Charles. I hope that you've been having a great and wonderful day. Remember, we are here on YouTube Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, unless we have an emergency, which hopefully will be a rarity, or I am doing some business that is during that time. But usually I try to block out this time so that we can have an uninterrupted discussion, reading, and conversation. All right, and we're also here on Sundays. On Sundays, only on YouTube and Facebook at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you're enjoying our weekday show, you can always jump on our YouTube channel and join us there as well on Sundays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Today is Thinking Thursday, Theology Thursday, and as promised, we are hopping back into the book Failures of Forgiveness by Dr. Maisha Cherry, What We Get Wrong and How to Do Better. Now, if you notice on this show, this is a read aloud podcast. We read books, we discuss it, and we dive into the concepts in each one of the books that we are sharing. If you have a book recommendation, as we begin to make our way through the season and we start completing some of these readings, if you have a book recommendation, feel free to share that book recommendation with us at the Daring Dialogues, all one word, at gmail.com. All right, let's hop into it. For those of you who are with us for the first time, I'm just going to read you a little bit of the synopsis of this book before we dive into this new chapter. Philosopher Maisha Cherry teaches us the right ways to deal with wrongdoing in our lives and in the world. Cherry began exploring forgiveness after some relatives of the victims of the mass shooting at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, forgave what seemed to be the unforgivable. She was troubled that many observers appeared to be more inspired by these acts of forgiveness than they were motivated to confront the hatred that actually led to the unalivings. That is a big mistake, Cherry argues. Forgiveness is not magic. We can forgive and still be angry. There can be good reasons not to forgive. And forgiving a wrong without tackling its roots solves nothing. Examining how forgiveness can go wrong in families, between friends, at work, and in the media, politics, and beyond, Cherry addresses forgiveness and race, canceling versus forgiving, self forgiveness, and more. She takes the burden of forgiveness off those who have been wronged and offers guidance both to those deciding whether and how to forgive and those seeking forgiveness. By showing us how to do forgiveness better, Cherry promises to transform how we deal with wrongdoing in our lives, opening a new path to true healing and reconciliation. So, the very premise of this book got me really excited because um, some of the points that she's making is things that I've always believed about forgiveness and have taught about forgiveness, but she goes a little bit more in depth in explaining, and I thought this would be a good read for our Theology Thursday, our Thinking Thursdays, for us to dive into this topic of forgiveness. Why? Because forgiveness really does affect our world. Forgiveness or unforgiveness has started wars. Uh, Case in point, what's happening over there in Northeast Africa, geopolitically termed the Middle East. That is wrapped around unforgiveness and long-standing resentments towards ethnic groups and countries. So I think that this is a very good topic to cover. If you are interested in this topic, again, the book is Failures of Forgiveness by Dr. Maisha Cherry. I encourage you to pick this book up because we're going to be reading it for several weeks every Thursday. We are on chapter 3, Making a Good Ask. How do we make a good ask when we're asking someone to forgive us? What are the right and wrong things to say? So we're going to just jump right into this chapter. We'll come to a good stopping place because obviously we're not going to finish a whole chapter in the time that we have. Let's go. Making a good ask. James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room is a beautiful yet tragic tale about love and our fear of and desire to escape love. The protagonist, David, is an American expatriate in Paris who finds himself having feelings not only for his fiancée, but also for a new suitor. As all fictional love triangles go, particularly ones rooted in dishonesty with oneself and others, the lovers hurt each other and the relationships end. David leaves Giovanni for the safety of Hella, and Hella leaves David for the safety of honesty. Giovanni and Hella feel betrayed by David. In recognizing his wrongdoing, David contemplates the question of forgiveness. On the night when he breaks up with Giovanni, David admits to his need to return to his fiancée. I wanted to beg him to forgive me, but this would have been too great a confession. Out of concern that any yielding in the moment would prevent him from leaving, David refrains from begging for forgiveness, although he wants to utter the words. But this is not a problem in a relationship to Hella. David, in recognizing his dishonesty to her, acknowledges to himself, I want to be forgiven. I want her to forgive me, but I do not know how to state my crime. He wants to ask for forgiveness but doesn't know what to confess, given his fear and shame about his sexuality. When his crime is finally revealed, not by David confessing, but when he is caught with another love interest, he does in fact ask for forgiveness. One day when you're happy, try to forgive me, he says. The reader is not surprised by David's thoughts about forgiveness. He has hurt people. He has hurt himself. Asking for forgiveness is the least he can do given the circumstances. If he has a moral compass at all, then he would, we expect, ask forgiveness from those whom he has disappointed and hurt. Literature, from Shakespeare to Baldwin, contains many examples of flawed characters making such requests to those they have harmed. But these asks aren't restricted to the plot lines of literary fiction. We often hear expressions of regret and pleas for forgiveness in our private lives, as well as in the public sphere. We express them privately to our loved ones, to colleagues, and even to strangers we bump into on the street. Politicians and celebrities make these gestures at news conferences, in press releases, on social media. These pleas can take several forms that have subtle differences. For instance, a person might announce, I want to say to the victims that I am truly sorry. I regret all the pain that I have caused them. I hope they can see just how sincere I really am. In doing so, the speaker is not asking for anything from the victims. He simply wants the victims to understand that he is sorry for the part he played or she played. In other cases, a wrongdoer might make a more direct request for forgiveness while acknowledging their wrongdoing. For example, I know that what I did was wrong. Can you please forgive me? Or they might say, as the character did, try to forgive me, after admitting that whatever I've done to hurt you, I didn't mean to do. Often, however, we do not ask for forgiveness. Instead, we make an inquiry into whether the victim would be willing to forgive. We ask about the possibility that the victim will forgive. We may even ask on a friend's behalf. If she were to apologize for what she did, could you find it in your heart to forgive her? Or we might ask whether the victim thinks that they will be able to forgive in the future. We've tried to make up for all the harm we've caused you and your tribe. 10 years have gone by now. Do you think you will ever forgive us? It is not surprising that these expressions often roll off our tongues, for we live in a world full of people who make mistakes and people who intentionally harm others. Expressions of regret and pleas for forgiveness can play an important role in rectifying these harms and repairing our relationships. On the other hand, being too afraid to utter these expressions out of fear of what they might reveal about us is no way to move forward, but they can also cause significant harm. If we are to ensure that our requests are more likely to help than harm, we need to think carefully about the different types of requests we make of those that we have wronged. This investigation will reveal that requesting forgiveness is not as simple and, as we sometimes assume, hope will motivate us to proceed with caution when making such requests. Throughout this chapter, there will be a series of practical suggestions for asking for and about forgiveness. The right and wrong things to say. Forgiveness requests, as I see them, fall into three categories. We're just going to talk about one of those categories today: commands, inquiries, and pleas. Commands and pleas are examples of requests for forgiveness. Inquiries are examples of requests about forgiveness. As we will see, there are right and wrong ways to say and extend each of these requests. So let's look at them in general. Let's see how much time we have. Let's do commanding and inquiring. We'll do those first. And then if we have time, we will get to pleading. If not, we will talk about that next time. Commanding forgiveness occurs, for example, when a teenager confesses to a caregiver that someone has mistreated them, and the caregiver responds by telling them to let it go, get over it, or simply forgive and forget. The latter response can be heard in the mouth of Shakespeare's King Lear when he says to his youngest daughter, Cordelia, "You must bear with me, pray you now, forget and forgive. I am old and foolish." Another example of commanding is when a spouse tells their partner, "I've apologized, forgive me already. What more do you want?" Commanding people to forgive you shows a lack of respect for victims by attempting to bend them to our will, to make our will superior to their own. There is in general no moral duty to forgive a wrongdoer, so the decision of whether to forgive should be left up to the victim. It is simply not our place to decide whether or not they should forgive. And when we issue such commands, we attempt to substitute their judgment with our own and fail to respect their own agency in forgiving us. Our judgments can lead to manipulative guilt tripping. Relationship experts Gary Chapman and Jennifer Thomas sum it up as follows. When, as the offender, I command to be forgiven, I'm like a monarch sitting on a throne, judging the offended person as being guilty of an unforgiving heart. The offended person is hurt and angry over my offense, but I am trying to hurry it up. I'm trying to speed up the process. I'm trying to make them feel guilty for not forgiving me. We should not command victims to forgive as ways to get them to do what we want them to do or to feel what we want them to feel. The decision to forgive is theirs to make. Anybody ever had somebody try to rush you to forgiveness? Oh, you should be over that now. Why haven't you forgiven yet? There may, of course, be cases where we will think that we have good reason to believe that the victim should forgive the wrongdoer. Perhaps we think it would be in the victim's best interest to forgive. But notice that commands do not appeal to any such reasons. When we command others to forgive, the command gets its force from our presumed authority as the requester. Think, forgive because I said so, rather than from an underlying reason or consequence, because it will give you relief. Victims do not exist for us to boss them around. Let's say that together. Victims do not exist for us to boss them around. If a victim decides to forgive, it will be owing to their own reasons and not because we demand that they do. Now, I wish this point could probably be broadcast on live television every time there's some sort of injustice done, especially to those who are in the Black community around police brutality, because people want them to move on and they want them to move on quickly. And a lot of times people want them to move on because they feel like, oh, well, if they if they say that they've forgiven, then it will be easier for them to win a civil suit oftentimes. They've been generous in forgiving, so yes, you should settle this civil suit with some funds. But again, victims do not exist for us to boss them around. Never command someone's forgiveness, ever. I mean, you could, but it's just not wise. Now let's look at this other kind of forgiveness, inquiring. The expressions, do you think you can forgive going forward? Or can you find it in your heart to forgive? Are examples of inquiries. These are requests that seek to understand whether or when a person may be willing to forgive. Not forget, forgive. In the right circumstances, inquiries can lessen or eliminate harm and help victims assert their agency. But we also must take care to avoid pressuring victims or prying too aggressively into their inner life. Broadly speaking, there are three types of inquiry requests: predictive inquiries, introspective inquiries, and check ins. Predictive inquiries, which involve asking what a person will do in the future regarding forgiveness, helps us understand what is possible going forward. When Royal, the patriarch of Wes Anderson's The Royal Tenenbaums, asks his son Chas, "You think you can start forgiving me?" he is making a predictive inquiry. Royal admits that he wants his son's forgiveness more for himself than for Chas, but there is nothing wrong with the question. Rather than asking victims to hurry up and forgive, predictive inquiries allow victims to guesstimate what they will or will not do in the future. Because this kind of request does not put the victim in the position of making an immediate commitment, it lessens or eliminates the undue social pressure that often accompanies requests about forgiveness. Part of the reason for this is that prediction differs in nature from promises or commitments. If you predict that you'll be willing to forgive in the future, but later change your mind, you have not lied. To lie is to assert something you believe to be false. However, in making a prediction about how you might feel or act, you did not do such a thing. You only reported what you thought you would be able to do in the future. When the future arrives, it might turn out that you still find it too difficult to forgive, that you have changed your mind, or that certain conditions have not been met, or certain revelations have been made. For instance, the offender has not yet shown remorse or been brought to justice. The predictive request invites an answer from the victim that anticipates these possibilities. Um, this is a huge one for a lot of people because I know for me, this is along the philosophy I have when it comes to forgiveness. If a person has not shown remorse, what is there for me to forgive? They're not sorry. They're not apologetic. They haven't even confronted the fact that an offense has been done. So to ask me to forgive in that condition would be pointless because the person has not shown remorse and the person has not said, I have done anything wrong. The predictive inquiry can also provide an opportunity for victims to state their own conditions. The question, do you think you can forgive going forward, opens up a dialogue for the victim who can then say things like, perhaps I can forgive if so and so happens. This is important because we often do not provide victims the opportunity to articulate their needs or explain what they see as possibilities for redress. In some cases, such as legal proceedings, this failure is explained by the fact that we have assigned other people to speak on behalf of victims. In other interpersonal cases, we simply fail to ask the victim, "What would you like to see done?" in order for forgiveness to occur. But this type of inquiry can introduce victims' needs into the conversation. It can give victims a sense of power, a power that wrongdoing and wrongdoers often take from them. Even though predictive inquiries can play an important role in empowering victims and repairing relationships, we must take care in how we pose such inquiries. Offered in a tone of curiosity, the question, "Do you think you can forgive moving forward?" is entirely appropriate. However, the same question put forward with a tone of authority, "Do you think you can forgive moving forward?" can be interpreted as a request that commands or blames or negatively judges the victim. Suggestion: ask, "What is possible in the future?" but watch your tone. In addition to asking victims to look to the future, we can also ask them to look within. Can you find it in your heart to forgive? This question, which seeks access into the private life of the victim, is what we call introspective inquiry. Whether such inquiries are appropriate will depend on the nature of the inquiry and the relationship between the requester and the victim. When a sister or therapist asks a woman whether she can find it in herself to love again, this question seems perfectly proper. The relationship these individuals share with the woman give them permission to enter their sister or patient's inner world. But the same question coming from a stranger is intrusive. The stranger is asking to gain access to something that they don't have the standing or permission to obtain. This often happens a lot on the internet when strangers are giving you advice about really, really difficult and tough things that have happened to you. And people come into the comment section and they say, do you think you can find it in your heart to forgive? You might be saying, "I don't know you like that to be having that conversation or that discussion." But this difference does help explain the frustration that the writer felt with several reporters in 2015. That summer, Samuel DuBose was unalived by a Cincinnati police officer at a traffic stop. A reporter, not a family friend or a family member, but a journalistic stranger, asked his mother, after it happened, "Can you see in your heart to forgive this police officer?" Earlier that spring, a police officer unalived Walter Scott. CNN's Anderson Cooper asked Judy Scott, his mother, what she felt in her heart and whether she feels forgiveness. The reporters, given their relationship or lack thereof with the families, had no right to ask victims' families these intimate questions. You might assume that prefacing the inquiry with, "Can I ask you a personal question?" makes it more permissible, no matter what kind of relationship exists between the asker and the person being asked. For how can we know which parts the person wants to keep strictly to themselves without asking? Once again, the appropriateness of this inquiry depends on the relationship between the parties. Coming from a family member, a colleague, or a new friend, this inquiry may be a welcome invitation to deepen the relationship. But coming from a stranger on the street, the mere request to ask a personal question can often cause discomfort. The social convention that we ought to be reluctant to inquire about strangers' personal lives is important because it keeps us out of each other's face. But it is also important for our humanity. We do not want to expose every aspect of our inner life to complete strangers. Well, some people don't, but we do have a group of people right now in society that don't mind exposing every aspect of their life to complete strangers. Even if the introspective question does not burden, pressure, or embarrass victims, there should still be certain boundaries to what can be asked of and about us. Part of being human is knowing that not just anyone has access to our inner life, and that there are boundaries to what others can know and ask of us, even when it comes to forgiveness. Only those invited by the victim to enter their private lives may ask the introspective inquiry. Now, of course, we know that society is working on making sure none of us have private lives at all, including wanting to access our private thoughts. We're not quite there yet in our society, but we may get to the point where even your thought life is no longer private. Just keep on the lookout for that. Suggestion: it is okay to ask a person to whom you are close what they are feeling or thinking about their forgiveness, but learn to recognize when this may not be any of your business. The final type of inquiry are check ins, inquiries into how a victim is doing with their forgiveness. We might ask, for instance, have you forgiven me yet? In contrast to a predictive inquiry, which asks whether the victim will forgive or can forgive in the future. Check ins ask whether the victim has forgiven. Maybe they just haven't shared it with you yet. Check ins are appropriate when they aim for mutual confirmation. Consider the example of Berta, the wife of a genocide prisoner, and Amy, a Rwanda genocide survivor. Have you forgiven me? When Berta finally asks the forgiveness question, she is not so much seeking a decision from Amy as seeking mutual confirmation of the forgiveness already expressed in Amy's actions. Check-ins are appropriate in this context because they're only really seeking verbal confirmation of what has already been stated in action. The person making the check-in wants to uncover what has been expressed but not yet verbally articulated. Check-ins are important because they can help provide clarity about the status of your relationship with someone that you might need forgiveness from. If the offender mistakenly believes that the victim has forgiven them, the victim is not yet ready to cross. In doing so, they may disrespect the agency of the forgiver and further damage the relationship. Check-ins can be helpful when there's evidence to suggest that the victim has forgiven you, but the offender remains uncertain. So, checking in and asking is the right thing to do. However, when an offender can be pretty certain that the victim has not forgiven, but makes the check-in anyway, it is inappropriate. Inappropriate check-ins can rush victims to forgive and express an impatience and insensitivity with what has occurred. Similarly, check-ins made repetitively, even based on evidence that suggests forgiveness, are inappropriate. They signal the expectation that the victim should have already forgiven, and they can put pressure on the victim to hurry up. Suggestion: ask if someone has forgiven you only if there is strong evidence that forgiveness has occurred. Be mindful not to ask in order to rush or pester the victim. And we're not going to make it to the last one today, but next time we'll talk about pleading. Simply put, to plead is to ask for forgiveness. So we'll take a look at pleading, and then we'll take a look at what to do when you are adding apologies to the mix, and then we'll close out. I hope you enjoyed learning about the ask, what makes a good ask, how to ask, and the types of asking that's out there. Did you learn something new about forgiveness today? If you did, let me know in the comments. We're heading over to our IG page to have the continuation of this conversation, the talk back part. If you're interested in joining us, you can meet us over on our Instagram, which is at Daring Dialogues, all one word. We are there live now. All right. I hope you have a great and wonderful rest of the day. Think about forgiveness. Ask yourself, are you rushing anyone to forgive? Or are you giving people the time to reckon with whatever offense you might have caused? Ask yourself, is anybody rushing me to forgive? And if so, how do you feel about that? How do I feel about someone rushing me to forgive? Has that person tried to make amends? Is that person showing any remorse? Should I be rushing to forgive? Or should I be thinking about whether or not this person should be a part of my future and the continuation of my personal journey? All right. Thank you again for your time and attention. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues. Be well, and most importantly, be light. All right.